Hello, we are back, and it is indeed our pleasure to have as our guest this evening a giant in the field, a legend, Dr.
Yes.
Margie Nichols, a transgender mental health specialist and creator of the Institute for Personal Growth in Northern New Jersey, now in 3 locations. But I really am not being hyperbolic. I would love to start off with having you tell our listeners a little bit about the incredibly important history that you were a part of.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, thank you very much for those lovely words. Some of them translate to old. I mean, I've been around a long time. I'm an early baby boomer. I was born in the late 40s. I've been around a long time. I don't want to tell you too much about I came from a working class background, but sort of because I was really good at school, wound up completely out of my element at Radcliffe. But then I did the whole 60s. Like I think I have the honor of being the first person kicked out of Radcliffe for intravenous drug use. Yeah. I did the whole 60s thing.
And what I know about Radcliffe, that's an achievement.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely right. Yeah. But I got myself clean, by the late 60s. I was, that's how my entree into the therapy field was actually as an ex-addict peer counselor. Some people may remember back in the days of therapeutic communities.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I went through a kind of a therapeutic community and then worked in one and then went to graduate school. But meanwhile, in terms of my own sexuality, I was, I mean, in some ways I'm a cliche of my generation. I was involved in the civil rights movements in the 60s, in the anti-war movement, early in the feminist movement, explored, tried to be as open as I could be about my sexuality, although that was harder. And came out as a lesbian in 1975. I was in graduate school at the time. Now, this was 2 years after homosexuality had been removed from the DSM. I couldn't have come out. I mean, what I try to get, especially people in the mental health field, to get a sense of what the history is. It wasn't that long ago. We're talking 50 years ago, not that long ago, less than 50 years ago. You could not be openly gay and be a mental health professional because you were mentally ill.
Right.
You suffered from mental illness. So, but in 73 that changed. I came out. I was for a long time one of those people who was like, hi, I'm Margie Nichols, I'm gay. You got something to say about that? Very kind of militant, edgy, involved in the lesbian feminist movement. In the late, so in 1976, I helped with a group of other feminist women in Central Jersey. I helped form the first federally funded battered women's shelter in the country in Keyport, New Jersey, if you can believe it. And but we didn't just have a battered women's shelter. We offered a lot of other women's services. And one of the things that we offered was a peer support group for lesbians, run by lesbians for lesbians. And I can't begin to tell you in 1976 what that was like. That was completely unheard of, completely unheard of. But the women that came to that group, it was like such a lifeline. Do you know what I mean? I mean, because these were women who'd grown up in a generation where many of them had been forcibly committed to mental institutions, that abandoned by their families. I mean, really, really tough hardship. Lots of violence, anti-gay violence, anti-lesbian violence. And it was so wonderful to be able to provide that experience. I knew instantly, my internship was in child and family therapy, but I knew instantly I didn't want to do child and family. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with gay and lesbian people. And that's what I did. I went on to, I tell the story. When I graduated, I got my PhD from Columbia in clinical psych in 1981. And
Wow.
I tell people I didn't want to go into private practice because back then, 1981, there's a whole big community psychology movement going, and private practice were like, they were like the, you know, the
Called analysts in Manhattan, right?
yeah, exactly. The analysts who were, you know, up on Park Avenue, all they cared about was money. But so I didn't want to do private practice, but I did want to work with gay people. And I called all of these community mental health centers all over New Jersey, and they all told me that they didn't have enough gay or lesbian clients to warrant hiring one staff member to work with that clientele. Do you believe that? 1981, right? So I started my own private practice. By 83, I located in Highland Park because it's somewhat centrally located in New Jersey. People came from all over because it was the people. This was the beginnings, really, of the gay affirmative therapy movement. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. It didn't have that name at the time, but I was one of that cohort that was doing gay affirmative therapy. And it was a lifeline and a godsend for people at that point.
Was there any training available, any mentors, or were you flying by the seat of your pants?
Well, I was flying by the seat of my pants, but I managed to, we did, many of us connected with each other. I was in the New York area. So even though I wasn't in New York, I connected with New York people. My closest colleague and mentor for many years was a gay man named Michael Chernoff, who went on to write a bunch of books about AIDS and barebacking and, you know, eroticizing same sex. And anyway, but there was, like in the late 70s, a national coalition of lesbian and gay healthcare providers. And we just, I don't know, there were like 300 of us maybe around the country, and we just hung tight to each other. And we had national, you know, we had conferences, and that was a way to network and meet people. But yeah, we were all flying by the seat of our pants. I mean, there were a couple of, Betty Berzon wrote a book, Positively Gay, in the 70s. Vivian Cass came out with her whole developmental identity theory about gay identity and development. I think that was actually the late 70s or early 80s, but we were all, how can I say, we were making it up as we went along.
Mm-hmm.
Making it up as we went along. Some of it was obvious, you know. I mean, and some of the concepts now translate to transgender affirmative psychotherapy, right? I mean, it's the same kind, some of the same concepts for all sex and gender minorities. Like one is the concept of minority stress and internalized societal stigma, right? That, you know, that many people back then, people had grown up never hearing a whisper of the idea that it was okay to be gay. And all that, I mean, all you ever heard was perverts, you know, creepy men on street corners, molesting little boys, that kind of thing. And so people had really internalized those attitudes. And so it sort of became obvious rather quickly that one of the therapeutic issues was to help people deal with their internalized homophobia and to help them recognize that what they were feeling wasn't about them as people. Right. It was about social attitudes, right? And it was about societal oppression. It was about societal oppression.
And
you know.
Sadly, 50, 60 years later, that attitude still hasn't changed, that people want to look at like suicide rates as evidence that have mental illness instead of recognizing that it's society and homophobia that causes
exactly. When enough people say they hate you, kind of self-loathing becomes a natural evolution.
Natural, right? Yes, and I think there are also some added things. For example, this is common for both gay men and many transgender people. Assigned male, kids who are assigned male at birth, right, raises boys, but who are very feminine in
Yeah.
appearance and interests and so on and so forth.
Right.
Oh my God.
Well, you remember, I think it was also in the late 70s, maybe also early 80s. I don't remember the author, but there was that book, Sissy
Richard
Boy
Green.
Syndrome.
Richard Green.
Green.
Oh, I could talk for hours about that whole,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Girls
He-
get away with that tomboy label, but sissy boys could.
Yeah, it was sort of slid under the radar and with the tomboy. But boy, there is nothing in life as despised as an effeminate boy, right? And so the trauma that people suffer, you know, so those were the kinds of things that we sort of figured out as we went along, and then I got trained as a sex therapist in 1982 and 1983 by Sandra Lieblum and Ray Rosen at their place in New Brunswick at UMDNJ.
Yeah.
Great training. And so I was then able to, there really was hardly anybody who was doing sex therapy with lesbians and gay men. So that, you know, that was a, you know, became a sort of a specialization. And then for a couple of years, 3 years, from 85 to 88, I started and became the first director of New Jersey's AIDS Social Service Program, Hyacinth Foundation. It's still around, but you know, that was, I mean, we had to do that, right? That's what lesbians did actually in the 80s, that was the big rapprochement. You know, before that, lesbians and gay men had been really pretty separate.
Right.
Politically, socially, you know, didn't like each other much. But then when AIDS hit, lesbians just stepped up, you know, and a lot of gay men appreciated it incredibly. And it really, that was the rapprochement between gay men and lesbians. So anyway.
Well, even, you know, 50, 60 years into that civil rights movement, it seems like history's come back around again, and we seem to be at the very beginning of society accepting trans folks. And
yes, I would agree. Absolutely. Right. So, yeah, because transgender activism and really transgender people coming together as part of a community didn't happen until the 90s. Right. It was the internet that made that possible for a whole lot of reasons we don't have time to go into now, but which I go into in my book in great detail. I do a whole history thing in my book of the evolution of the LGBTQ plus community as well as queer affirmative, the evolution of queer affirmative therapy, because I'm big on, like, you got to know the history. But anyway, so
let me just give you a plug, since it's not out yet, but coming out in the fall. We want all of our therapists, listeners especially, to wait for the Modern Clinician's Guide to LGBTQ plus clients, the Inclusive Therapist. Beautiful title. Can't wait to read it. And I might add that Dr. Nichols,
thank you. Yeah.
A major chapter to the book that we had the pleasure of editing, The Art of Sex Therapy Supervision. Margie did a chapter on sex therapy with transgender and gender nonconforming patients.
Right.
Which was huge. The book would have been like a gap-toothed smile without that chapter.
Yes, I agree. Well, these days anyway, you know. Yeah, so you're right. So societies, you know, transgender activism really started in the 90s. Things and not surprisingly, one of the early issues that transgender activists took up was this issue of being pathologized.
Of course.
Right? Which led to changes in DSM-5 and the big changes in the standards of care for treatment of transgender and gender nonconforming people. You know, the big change is basically, hey, you know what, guess what? There's nothing weird or abnormal or sick about being gender diverse. Just, you know, there isn't. But most people still have to catch up with that. But you know why? I think because transgender issues, and especially the whole non-binary thing, right? I mean, you tell people, hey, guess what? Gender isn't just men and women. It's not just male and female. That's just like, you see people's heads explode.
Right.
You know, that it's just, they can't wrap their head around that. And it just, so that's why the whole transgender issue threatens people, because you wonder why their reactions are so out of proportion to reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this whole transgender predators in the bathroom. Like, how many transgender people do you think come into your bathroom in a year? You know what I mean? At your little truck stop in South Carolina. I mean,
Travesties. I mean,
Well,
how
it
in the
still
world
is.
would a
it's transgender people become the symbol of everything
Sure.
pulling
because
apart.
people equate transgender people with sexual deviants and predators and offenders, and think that a guy's going to put on a dress so he can hang around a woman's room and molest little girls. Meanwhile, transgender people are the most at risk for violence.
That's right.
In public places, especially
Absolutely.
bathrooms. And how in the world is anybody going to check? We're going to need genital inspectors outside of public bathrooms to check driver's licenses or birth certificates.
I think Mike Huckabee wants to do that.
Madness.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
And I think there really is this relationship. Right? It's one of these beautiful sort of inverse relationships with really, I think the greater that reaction, the greater that negativity, the more they are uncomfortable, not only with themselves, but with just the whole idea. And I find that especially around whether it's the bathroom thing or just the pathologizing of transgender people, that the less they understand, the more resistant they are.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think, that's really what that connecting point is. Yeah, it's fear.
So, and the other thing though is that there's still, I mean, we're talking about the culture at large, but within our own field, there's still, number one, incredible ignorance, which is why, you know, Rachel and Arlene Lev and I are putting together a certification program in transgender mental health, doing mental health counseling with transgender and gender non-binary people, because there's an incredible, I mean, the standards of care just changed in 2011, and the DSM-5 came out, what,
15.
12, 13? Yeah, right, exactly. So, I mean, almost everybody was taught something wrong in graduate schools. So nobody's got good training on this. So some of it's that, and some of it is mental health professionals are threatened too. You know, mental health professionals are threatened by it too. I mean, you know, we're people like everybody else.
That's right.
Similar.
You know, that's I complain about that too often.
Well,
yes, we're people like everyone else, but the mental health field should not mirror the society at large.
I agree. No, it's our job. It's our job.
It's our job, right? Like, you know, my favorite, my go-to guilt line is couples counselors that don't talk about sex are like plumbers that don't do toilets. Right. And their therapists go, ooh, I don't do the gaze. It's out of my wheelhouse. I've never been trained. Yeah, go get trained or get out of the field.
Well, that's been a catch-all excuse to avoid a lot of this stuff. We saw the same thing with medical doctors treating patients with HIV. Oh, no, that's not what I'm going to do. You should go to somebody who's really trained in that. And there's that, one person in an entire geographic region.
Right. I mean, it's only been around since, you know, the first case in 1981. Who's trained in it? Yeah.
Yeah. But I think anytime we're changing the status quo, there's going to be the reaction. And, you know, by changing that foundation of what people have always thought they knew about gender, that it is that binary, that it is that either or proposition, I think I think we can't be surprised that people are in a tizzy about it.
Yeah,
gender is, new books, they have to get new stationery, they have to change the, you know, whatever, all the things that they have to do, that people just don't like doing things differently.
Yeah. And it's I mean, it is, if you think about it, one of the first things when you visually, when you look at somebody new that you've never seen before, one of the first things you do unconsciously is read their gender. It's so big in that for us to categorize, you know, which box.
Sure.
It's
And
it's
then the
threatening
reaction.
people when they can't put somebody in the box. Yeah,
They
right.
get
Or-
nervous.
Or how dare you defy my expectation?
That's
Yeah.
the big part.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you mentioned the third plug I wanted to make sure we got in, the certification track, which we're so proud of.
Yeah.
In Sex Therapy Institutes. We couldn't possibly have partnered with a bigger giant in training therapists in transgender mental health and working with transgender patients should they need our services.
Thanks. But yeah, I want to give a plug to Arlene, because Arlene was actually, I mean, in terms of specializing, she was there before I was. She wrote the book in 2003. She wrote the book called Transgender Emergence, which is written for mental health, and it was a totally non-pathologizing point of view. She's been involved in crafting the standards of care. So, you know, between her and me, you know, I have a lot more on the sex therapy side, and I kind of a range of clinical experience between her and me, and the people that we've pulled in to do these seminars. It's really top notch. I think.
Yes.
I think
to all of our
I wish that when I had been starting out, I had the course that we're designing now. You know, I would have felt much better about my work. So
to all of our therapists listening and our sexologist friends and colleagues, you know, like the theme of our recent summit, don't get left behind. Your millennial and Gen Z patients know more about sex than you do. So this is the kind of training, even, you know, in my own evolution, I used to not be, I didn't see the need, thinking that if you're trained as a sex therapist, you'll get it. And then you'll start to do the work. Until Rachel helped me realize you need 1 3-hour class on gender to be a sex certified as a sex therapist. What can anybody learn in 3 hours? You need to immerse yourself. Arlene and Margie.
There's a lot of issues, right?
Put together some of the best names in the business, a real all-star. And you need to check out modernsextherapyinstitutes.com to find out about that training. And our time's gotten away from us. Any final thoughts, Margie? We're so grateful to have you join us.
I guess one thing I want to say for people, you know, is this might be a time that the transgender and gender non-binary people might reach out to you. One of the things that's been impacted because of COVID is healthcare, right? And a lot of transgender people have medical needs that, you know, for hormones and surgeries and so on and so forth. And that's this has made it very difficult for a lot of people. And so that's an additional stress. People who have been waiting, you know, 2 years for a surgery and it's now canceled because it's an elective procedure, you know. People who want to start hormones and they can't because there's no providers available right now. So, you know, just keep in mind that you might get more clients like that because this is a pretty stressful time. And transgender people tend to make less money than the average, more likely to be either in a service profession or one of the people that's lost their jobs. So you may, even if that's not your specialty and you're not used to it, you may find people reaching out to you more, and it'd be good to know something about them. So
necessary to know a lot. Yes.
Right.
We take money from patients for them to teach us about their lives. We have to.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, we're so grateful.
Hey.
Thank you so much. So great to see you
in our lives. Sorry we won't have conferences this year to hug and hang out, but
I know. Next year.
Connected virtually.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Stay well.
All right.
Again, Dr. Margie Nichols, the founder and former director of the Institute for Personal Growth in Jersey City, Highland Park, and Freeport, New Jersey. Freehold.
Perfect. Okay.
Be well, Margie.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
Bye. Bye.